know how some people say you should never test someone unless you're prepared for them to pass? Well, I learned that lesson the hard way. Let me just say, if you're enjoying this kind of drama, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. If you're new here, I've got plenty more stories where this came from. I'm Charlie. I'm 29 and I've always been good at getting what I want. Not through tantrums or dramatics. That's amateur hour. I'm talking about the art of gentle suggestion. The perfectly timed, helpful idea, the way you can guide someone to a decision without them even realizing they're being guided. It's a skill, really, and Frank never saw it coming. Frank and I had been together for 2 years, living in his apartment downtown. His name on the lease, his furniture, his rules. But slowly, I'd been making it ours. A throw pillow here, a different coffee brand there, suggesting we skip his loud friend group for quieter nights in. Frank was the type who overthought everything, analyzing every purchase and decision like he was solving world hunger. It was exhausting sometimes, watching him stress over whether to buy name-brand cereal or generic, but it also made him easy to manage once you understood his patterns. He had this thing about his possessions, treated them like they were sacred or something. 2 cars sat in our building's garage, his precious Honda Accord that he babied like it was made of gold, and some beat-up Ford Taurus from the 90s that he kept for sentimental reasons. The Taurus was basically a rolling piece of junk, but Frank would get this nostalgic look whenever he talked about it being his first car. Men and their emotional attachments to machinery, I never understood it. The thing about Frank was that he worked from home most days doing some kind of consulting work that kept him glued to his laptop. Meanwhile, I was out there in the real world dealing with actual people and actual problems, like my brother Wes, who was going through a rough patch and needed support from family. That's what family does. We help each other out, no questions asked. Wes had been staying with us on and off for the past few weeks after losing his job. He's 26 and still figuring things out, which some people might judge, but I think it shows he's not willing to settle for just any crappy position. He has standards. The problem was he'd landed this new opportunity that required reliable transportation, and taking the bus wasn't exactly professional for someone trying to make a good impression. It was a Tuesday evening when I brought it up. Frank was on his laptop as usual, probably obsessing over some spreadsheet or client email. I was curled up on the couch I'd convinced him to buy, by the way, after pointing out how his old one made the place look like a college dorm. Babe, I said, not looking up from my phone where I was scrolling through job listings for Wes. Wes needs a car. Frank glanced over his fingers, still typing. Okay, is he looking at dealerships? I finally looked at him, using the expression I reserved for when someone was missing something obvious. No, silly. He needs your car. Frank stopped typing. My Accord. Well, yeah. I said like it was the most natural thing in the world. He has this new job he needs to get to, and it's not fair for him to have to take public transportation. You work from home half the time anyway. You can just use rideshare when you need to go somewhere. I watched Frank's face as he processed this. He had this way of going very still when he was thinking, which usually meant he was about to overcomplicate something simple. Before he could start with his analysis paralysis, Wes walked in from the kitchen with a beer, one of Frank's imported ones that costs twice what normal beer should cost. Yeah, man, Wes said, settling into the armchair. It would be a huge help. I can even throw you a couple $100 for it. A couple $100 for a car worth at least $20,000. I thought that was generous, considering we were family and Frank could afford to take the loss. But I could see Frank's jaw tighten slightly. That little tell he had when something bothered him, but he was trying to be diplomatic about it. My Accord, Frank repeated slowly. That's a big ask. I leaned forward, sensing an opening. I know, baby, but think about it as an investment in us and our family. We're a team, right? What's yours is mine. And what matters to me should matter to you. That phrase, what's yours is mine, seemed to hit something in Frank. His expression shifted, became more thoughtful, and I knew I had him. Frank always responded to appeals about our relationship and future together. He was sentimental that way. Okay, he said softly, and I felt a little thrill of victory. Of course, Family is important. I could practically feel the relief radiating from Wes, and I gave Frank my most appreciative smile. See, this was how relationships were supposed to work. Partners supporting each other's families, making sacrifices for the greater good. There's just one thing, Frank continued, his tone serious. The bank still holds the title to the accord. It's technically not mine to give until it's fully paid off. Legal complications and all that. My smile faltered slightly. You mean, but my other car? Frank said earnestly. That one's completely mine. Title's in my desk drawer, no liens, no complications. And since it's older, the insurance and registration will be way cheaper for Wes, much more practical as a starter car. I felt a flicker of annoyance. The Taurus, that rattling piece of junk that sounded like it was dying every time Frank started it up. But Wes was already brightening at the word free. And I was trapped by my own family. First logic. I couldn't exactly object without looking hypocritical. Wow, babe. I managed forcing enthusiasm into my voice. That's so generous. The next day, Frank spent hours cleaning that old car, which struck me as typical of his obsessive nature. He vacuumed every surface, scrubbed the faded paint, even polished the cracked dashboard until it looked almost respectable. Watching him fuss over it, I felt a mix of appreciation and exasperation. This was exactly the kind of over-the-top effort Frank put into everything, even giving away a car that was barely worth the metal it was made of. We went to the DMV together, Frank handling all the paperwork with his usual methodical precision. He signed the title over to Wes with a flourish like he was doing something momentous instead of just getting rid of an old beater. Wes drove away in a cloud of exhaust and backfiring noises that he probably thought sounded cool, but just made me embarrassed for him. That week, Frank was extra attentive, bringing me coffee in bed, suggesting we order from my favorite Thai place, being more physically affectionate than usual. I interpreted this as him finally understanding how relationships were supposed to work, how supporting my family was supporting me. I'd successfully navigated what could have been a major conflict and come out stronger on the other side. I even posted a subtle story on Instagram about partners who understand that love means supporting each other's families no matter what. The likes and comments rolled in. Heart emojis, relationship goals, responses, friends saying how lucky I was to have someone so understanding. It felt good to be validated, to know that other people recognized what Frank had done was the right thing. Friday afternoon, Frank mentioned he was taking a half-day something about errands he needed to run. I barely paid attention. I was busy helping Wes prepare for his first week at the new job, making sure he had everything he needed to make a good impression. Frank's schedule wasn't really my concern anyway. He was flexible enough to handle his own time management. When Frank came home that evening, I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard a car door slam in the parking garage. But it wasn't the familiar sound of his Honda. This was different, quieter, more expensive sounding. I glanced out the window and saw Frank walking toward the building, but behind him in his parking spot was something that made me do a double take. A Tesla. Brand new midnight silver, looking like it had just rolled off a showroom floor. Frank, I called as he came through the door. Whose car is that? He had this expression I'd never seen before. Not quite smug, but definitely satisfied. Mine, he said simply. Bought it this afternoon. I stared at him. You bought a Tesla? I did. Figured I needed a reliable daily driver now that I gave my other car away. He hung up his keys on the hook by the door. Those new Tesla keys that looked more like a credit card than traditional car keys. For a moment, I was actually excited. If Frank was making Tesla money, that changed things considerably for us. Weekend trips, nicer restaurants, maybe even looking at a bigger place. But then something in his tone, the way he emphasized, gave my other car away, made me pause. How much did that cost? I asked. I paid cash, Frank said. Been saving for a while, actually. Just moved up my timeline a bit. Cash. For a Tesla. I felt a weird mix of pride and irritation. Pride that my boyfriend had that kind of money, irritation that he'd never mentioned having that kind of money. We'd been splitting groceries and utilities while he was sitting on enough savings to buy a luxury car outright. That's amazing, I said, though something felt off about the whole situation. I mean, the timing is perfect, right after helping Wes out. Frank nodded. Funny how things work out. Saturday morning, I was still in bed when Frank's phone started ringing. He was in the shower, so I glanced at the screen. Wes probably calling to thank Frank again, or maybe to give him an update on how the first few days were going. But when Frank answered putting it on speaker while he got dressed, Wes's voice came through loud and furious. Dude, what the hell is wrong with this car? There was road noise in the background, the sound of traffic. I'm stuck on the side of the highway. The mechanic I called said the transmission is completely shot and it needs a whole new exhaust system. He's quoting me $3,000 in repairs. $3,000, you sold me a lemon. Done paint your forgotten. I sat up in bed immediately defensive. Frank hadn't sold him anything. He'd given Wes a free car, which was more than most people would do. But I could hear the panic in my brother's voice, the genuine distress, and I felt that familiar surge of protectiveness. Frank's response was calm, almost eerily so. Wes, I didn't sell you anything. I gave you a 27-year-old car for free. The title is in your name now. It was running fine when it left my possession. Let me talk to him. I said, reaching for the phone, but Frank shook his head. I'm sorry you're having trouble. Frank continued, but it's your car now, so it sounds like it's your repair bill. I could hear my own voice in the background of Wes's call. He must have put us on speaker. Arthur, this is ridiculous. You did this on purpose. You have to pay for the repairs. Or better yet, just trade cars with him. Give him the Honda and take the Taurus back. Frank looked at me directly as he answered. Charlie, the Taurus isn't mine to take back. It's legally Wes's property now. I can't be responsible for what happens to his car. There was a pause. Then Wes again, his voice tight with rage. I saw your new car, by the way. A Tesla. You bought a freaking Tesla while my car is falling apart on the highway. I did buy a Tesla, Frank said cheerfully. I needed a new daily driver after all, since I gave my other car away to help family. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could practically feel Wes's shock and fury through the phone, and my own anger started building. This felt calculated, deliberate. Frank had known that old car was a piece of junk, and he'd given it to my brother anyway while secretly planning to upgrade himself. We need to talk, I said to Frank after he hung up. I'm listening. This isn't right. You can't just leave Wes stranded like this. He's family. Frank sat down on the edge of the bed, and his expression was different than I'd ever seen it. Not angry, not defensive, just, resolved. Charlie, you asked me to give your brother a car. I gave him a car. A free car with clean title that was running when he took possession. What happens after that isn't my responsibility. But you knew it was going to break down. I knew it was an old car with old car problems. I also knew that Wes was getting something for nothing, and that if he wanted reliability, he could have bought his own car or at least had it inspected before driving it across the state. I stared at him, seeing something I'd never noticed before. Frank wasn't the pushover I'd thought he was. He'd been playing chess while I thought we were playing checkers. So, what, you're just going to let him deal with this alone while you drive around in your brand new Tesla? That's exactly what I'm going to do, Frank said. And I think it's best if I stay somewhere else for a while. Give you and Wes space to figure out his transportation situation. He was already moving toward the closet, pulling out a travel bag. Not a suitcase or duffel bag, just a simple black travel bag that he started filling with clothes. You're leaving? I couldn't keep the shock out of my voice. I'm giving you what you wanted. Space for your family to stay here and work things out. I'll be at a hotel. And just like that, he was gone. Left me sitting in his apartment, surrounded by his furniture, staring at the empty spot where his travel bag had been. The calls started immediately. Wes panicking about the car and the repair costs. My mom wanting to know why Wes was calling her. Crying about being stranded. My dad demanding to know what kind of man abandons his girlfriend's family in a crisis. I tried calling Frank, but he didn't answer. Text messages went unread. It was like he'd just vanished, leaving me to clean up the mess he'd created by giving Wes a broken down piece of junk. That's when I decided to take control of the situation. If Frank wanted to play games, I could play games too. I had keys to his apartment, I was on the lease as an occupant, and I wasn't going to be pushed around by someone who thought he could manipulate me with his little car trick. I called Wes and told him to come stay at the apartment while we figured things out. Frank had abandoned his responsibilities, so we just have to take care of ourselves. Wes needed a stable place to stay, especially with his car situation, and I wasn't about to let Frank's petty revenge affect my family's well-being. Over the next few days, I crafted several emails to Frank explaining the situation from a more rational perspective. I laid out how our relationship had been a partnership, how the apartment was the home we'd built together, how his car offer had been misunderstood as genuine help rather than some kind of test. I explained how his abandonment was affecting not just me but my family, and how his new Tesla was basically him flaunting his wealth while Wes faced financial ruin. The emails went unanswered. I tried a different approach reaching out through social media. I posted some carefully worded thoughts about partners who abandon their responsibilities when things get difficult, about the importance of supporting each other's families, about how true character shows during times of stress. The responses were mixed. Some friends offered support, but others seemed to already know more about the situation than they should have. That's when I realized Wes had been telling everyone who would listen about the lemon car Frank had given him. He'd been so vocal about his situation that our mutual friends already had the full context, which made my posts look less like justified venting and more like I was trying to control the narrative. A week after Frank left, I got a call from someone I didn't recognize, the building's property manager, Monica. Miss Vance, I need to discuss your occupancy situation. I understand your boyfriend has moved out temporarily and it's just a misunderstanding, I said quickly. He'll be back. I see. And you've moved your brother into the apartment. Something in her tone made me defensive. He's just staying here while he gets back on his feet. It's temporary. I'm afraid that violates the lease agreement. Section 7, subsection B, specifically prohibits unauthorized long-term guests without prior approval. I'm going to need to send an official notice. Frank is fine with it. I lied. This is between me and him. Actually, it's between the tenant, Frank, and the property management company. Your name isn't on the lease, Miss Vance. The next day, there was a notice taped to the door. Official letterhead legal language, but the message was clear. Wes and I had 3 days to vacate or face formal eviction proceedings. I called Frank immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. The landlord just served us with an eviction notice, I said as soon as he picked up. Frank, this will destroy your rental history. What did you do? I didn't do anything, Charlie. You violated the terms of my lease by moving your brother in without permission. The property manager found out. This is the consequence. You can fix this. Just call Monica and tell her Wes is your guest. But he's not my guest. You moved him in after I left. I'm not going to lie to my property manager. So what are we supposed to do? Wes has nowhere else to go. That sounds like a problem for Wes to solve. You have 2 days left. He hung up and I stood there staring at the phone, finally understanding that Frank wasn't bluffing. He wasn't coming back to fix this. He was going to let his own apartment get flagged for eviction violations rather than help us. My dad called that evening, his voice tight with controlled anger. Charlie, I just got off the phone with your boyfriend. He sent me a photo of some car title with Wes's name on it. What the hell is going on over there? I tried to explain, but even as the words came out, they sounded weak. Frank had given Wes a free car. The title was legally transferred. The car had been running when Wes drove it away. Wes owned the car and its problems. So you're telling me, my dad said slowly, that you asked your boyfriend to give your brother his good car. He gave him a different car instead. And now you're all mad because the free car broke down. It's not that simple, Dad. Frank knew that car was junk. He did this on purpose. Did he lie about the condition of the car? Well, no, but he knew. Did he charge Wes for it? No, but did he force Wes to take it without getting it inspected? I couldn't answer that because we both knew Wes had been so excited about getting a free car that he'd driven it off the same day without even looking under the hood. Charlie, my dad said, and his voice was tired. You need to get out of that apartment. Tonight. This whole thing is embarrassing for our family. The next evening, Frank showed up at the apartment with 2 friends I'd never met, plus Monica with her clipboard. I opened the door to find them standing there like some kind of official delegation. You're late, I said, checking my phone. The notice said 5 p.m. Traffic. Frank said, walking past me into what used to be our home. The apartment was a mess. Wes's stuff everywhere, takeout containers on the counter, his clothes in the bedroom Frank and I used to share. Looking at it through their eyes, I suddenly saw how it must appear like we'd moved in and taken over, claiming territory that wasn't ours. "Miss Vance," Monica said crisply, "are you prepared to vacate the premises?" By an entrance der Winsekekent. I looked at Frank, searching for any sign of the man who used to bring me coffee in bed, who used to accommodate my suggestions and requests. I found nothing familiar in his expression. "You think you've won?" I said to him. "You think you can just kick us out?" "Yes," Monica answered before Frank could. "That is precisely what's happening. First, or as in," I said, turning back to Frank, "you're going to compensate us for the emotional distress for the car you deliberately sabotaged for the public humiliation." Wes appeared from the kitchen, pointing an accusatory finger. "That repair bill is $3,000, man. You owe me." This was our last chance to salvage something from this disaster, to make Frank understand the damage he'd caused by his petty revenge scheme. Monica's voice cut through our demands like ice. "Any claims for financial compensation are civil matters that have no bearing on the lease violation. You need to leave now, or I'll be calling the sheriff to have you escorted out as trespassers." The threat of actual law enforcement, something we couldn't argue with or manipulate, finally broke through. I looked at Frank one more time, hoping to find some crack in his resolve, some sign of the accommodating boyfriend I'd been living with for 2 years. There was nothing. I grabbed my purse and the box of my things I'd already packed, fury building in my chest. "Fine. Keep your stupid apartment. I hope you enjoy being alone for the rest of your life." Wes followed me out, slamming the door behind us, leaving Frank standing in his reclaimed space with his witnesses and his property manager and his brand new Tesla keys. 3 weeks later, I was back living with my parents, sleeping in my childhood bedroom, while Wes dealt with his broken-down car in their driveway. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of him trying to start that piece of junk, the engine turning over and failing, a daily reminder of how completely Frank had outmaneuvered us. I heard through Victoria, a mutual friend, that Frank had sold his Honda and put the money into some investment account. He was apparently thriving in his new life, had even redecorated the apartment, and seemed genuinely happy to be living alone again. The thing that bothered me most wasn't losing the apartment or even the relationship. It was how everyone seemed to think Frank had been justified in his actions, like giving someone a broken car and then refusing to fix it was somehow reasonable. Like abandoning your girlfriend when her family needed support was admirable rather than cruel. I got one last text from Frank, sent about a month after everything fell apart. It was simple. "Hope Wes figured out his transportation situation." I stared at that message for a long time, trying to decode whether it was genuine concern or just another twist of the knife. In the end, I deleted it without responding. Looking back now, I can see that Frank had been planning his exit strategy from the moment I asked him to give up his car. He'd seen it as some kind of test, and when I failed to meet his expectations, he'd systematically dismantled our entire life together. The Tesla, the hotel, the eviction, it had all been calculated to maximum effect. What I still can't understand is why he couldn't have just talked to me about it. Why he had to turn a simple family request into some elaborate revenge plot. Relationships are supposed to be about compromise and supporting each other, and instead of working with me, he'd chosen to punish me for trying to help my brother. But I suppose that says everything about the kind of man Frank really was, underneath all that careful consideration and apparent generosity. When it came down to it, he was selfish, vindictive, and completely unwilling to make real sacrifices for the people who mattered to me. Maybe I'm better off finding out now rather than wasting more years with someone who would abandon me the moment things got complicated.